Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Thank you, Maddie, for those hand gestures. And for you, the audience, joining us here today, this evening, morning, night, wherever you are. And so, as you know, we are housekeepers. And so we have some housekeeping before we get into this episode.
If you want to know, because you all do and have been asking, the secret to our intellect and our handsome good looks, there are 3 things you have to do. 1, touch nature. 2, consume good product. 3, wear good product. And how you can do this, and in this order, you start by going to Cabin on the Coulee, cotc.ca.
Where you can touch some grass.
Touch some grass, get into some nature. This is time to rejuvenate your soul. Our family does this once a year. It is rated #1 farm stay in Canada, according to TripAdvisor. And so go to cotc.ca, and this is where you can go to these central Alberta glam sites with your family.
Yeah, it is between May to November, and people are already booking vacations, so guys, make sure to book in advance. And if you go on that website, you'll see that you have the selection between the cabin, which holds 6 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 4 beds. You also have the Coulee Yurt, which holds 5 guests, 3 bedrooms, 3 beds. And then last but not least, the Grouse House, which holds 4 guests, 1 bedroom, and 2 beds. All the photos are online, and the cabin and the Grouse House are pet friendly. The Coulee Yurt is not. But again, go to cotc.ca to check those guys out, and then you can go to their Substack, Cabin on the Coulee Farm, to get updates on the family and the business and any updates. And if you scroll down, you'll see, oh, these 2 lovely people, or 3 lovely people. You'll see the owner of the business, Eric, interviewing me and Maddie when we were at Cornerstone. And if you hadn't noticed those beautiful garments that we are wearing,
you can buy a beautiful garment on our Buy Me a Coffee. This is step 2. You can buy us a matcha on the homepage, because that's how you be healthy. This is the second thing you need to do to get our intellect. And if on the far right, you can see shop. That's how you get the 3rd and final step, which is beautiful garments, the Alberta jerseys.
And what is it that Jordan Peterson says? He says you got to dress up like you actually care about yourself. Mm-hmm. And not only do we dress like we care about ourselves, but you and us, we all can dress like we care about our nation, which we do. I am not joking about that. I'm just having fun.
And you can buy more than one if you want to spread the love to family members. Makes good gifts. When you buy it, it'll do a little pop-up message for you to send me your size, so I know what to send you.
Yep. So again, if you want to achieve our lovely intellect and handsomeness, then check out Cabin on the Coulee Farm, buy me a coffee, aka matcha, and support us by shopping for a jersey and support Alberta that way. So thank you guys for listening to our little segment, and without further ado, we can get on with the episode.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes, and we are, again, very exultant because we have Megha Lillywhite back on. Because the first episode, we intended to talk about her books, and it didn't happen.
Because she is filled with so many magnificent insights that we just didn't get around to it.
Yes, and the reality is, the goal of the first podcast was to understand her overall values and how you can get a mind and foster a mind in order to get a book like we're going to talk about today, because that's all of the cultural work, because it starts with, a solid individual to then think through all of these ideas. So today we will be going over, she has 2 books, and I know everybody watching this is going to want to pick it up, especially if you are a parent. Where we left off in our last episode was we were about to allude to Epistemology, because I had a question regarding it. There is this axiom that I've seen both in the West and even in more traditional cultures, that because of the biblical proverb, iron sharpens iron, so shall man sharpen man. I've heard, a man can't raise a woman and a woman can't raise a man. Now, I believe there's part truth to that. However, our brother read Epistemology because we picked it up for him for Christmas. I know it was partly as a joke, because we have heard the axiom that a woman, being Megha, cannot teach a man how to be a man, and yet our brother read it looked at us and said, "That's a solid read. I agree with most of that," which completely, flabbergasted me. So one of my starter questions, Megha, to pick up from our last podcast was how did you in your brain, were you ever told that axiom that, oh, you can't raise a man because you're a woman? And then how did you get through that if you were told it? Or was it just not a factor at all? Because you wrote an entire book on what it's like to be a Chad or raise, a gentlemanly like man. So how did that work for you? Because that, to me, in my Western mind, it is unorthodox.
So the title Bro Epistemology came from the essay that launched my Substack blog into fame in the first place, in which it was one of my earliest essays, in which I talked about the interesting idea that, from my experience, the bros, quote unquote, are the guys who tend to have the most sane ideas about everything, not just in relation to health and fitness. That's where they get called a bro because they're gym bros, but also in arenas of politics, relationships, religion, everything. Of course, I'm not talking about the manosphere that has kind of branched off from that and grown into its own beast. I'm talking about the OG, gym bros who would randomly offer really sage advice about life. And then I found myself wondering why that is. And I think I accidentally stumbled upon an idea that many greater philosophers than I have already come up with, including people like Plato and Aristotle, which is that you can't cultivate the mind without also cultivating the body, and vice versa. And because the mind is not some strange, fairy tale thing that exists on a different dimension. It's actually forms. It emerges out of a physical brain and a physical body. And studying neuroscience, I was very amazed to learn about the fact that the brain is just one ganglion of several in your body, and a ganglion is a cluster of neurons. And actually, by learning neuroscience, I learned that your mind exists all over your body. Your mind is not just in your brain, it's also in your fingers and your legs and your bone cells and your heart cells. And because if you think about it, all of these cells are doing some level of information processing, memory, and thinking. And not to get too into it, but I find this very interesting, talking about hockey players when they assessed the speed at which they blocked a hockey puck. That speed was so fast that it would be impossible if you were to account for it based on synaptic signaling between the eye to the leg and to the brain and all those different organs getting them involved. So clearly the leg was thinking on its own. Yeah, so not to get too off topic, but to answer your question, because I'm not a politician, the reason that I came up with bro epistemology, I didn't start out thinking, I'm so wise and sage, I should write a book about how to raise men, never having raised a man or been a man.
Good to know.
Yeah, so I just started it because I had written a series of essays about how to find the truth in an age of information overload and a high noise to signal ratio on the internet. We have all the world's information, and yet people are more clueless than ever. And that's only accelerated with AI, by the way. And so I just wrote a series of essays relating to science, nutrition, philosophy, history, geopolitics, and I compiled them in one place on how we can discern good ideas from bad ideas. And I called it bro epistemology. And mysteriously or miraculously, it turned out to be interpreted as a guide on how to be one of these wise bros. And I guess I kind of reverse engineered it because, when you see someone doing something you admire, so for example, for me, it was the bros who seem to have the right answers on so many different subjects. I tried to reverse engineer what they were doing right, and I might have hit on some right answers.
That is really funny you say that, because I did the exact same thing. My bro was my dad, and because my dad worked on the rigs for 17 years,
Rigor wisdoms.
rigor wisdom.
That's what it was.
Some of them
Instead
are
of
more
bro, Chad
vulgar.
wisdoms.
Some of them are more vulgar,
Yeah.
however, and I know you wouldn't approve of them. But one thing that he said was that the men would compliment him because the man that he was on the rigs was the same man that he was when he came home and operated with his family. And a lot of the men couldn't say the same for them. The man that they chose to demonstrate themselves on the rigs was a different version to their wife. And one thing, as a woman, we're very hormonal and we're inconsistent. And at the time I was also a young woman, so it's even more emphasized. I thought, okay, I want some consistency in my demonstration and in my life, and the first place I'm gonna get it is with me. So how do I do that? Well, I'm gonna mimic my dad because he's very consistent. And so it's funny that you say you were mirroring the bros. And I also find the connection that you started with a description of the body, and I find that admirable, because in the academic world, and this is why I think your level of thinking is a bit beyond the academic world, is that they completely discard the body and they discard even the brain. Funny enough, they'll look at ideas and the mind and consciousness and the soul, but they won't consider what you just brought forth is the physicality, that your mind is made of a physical brain, literally, and that brain is physically throughout the whole body. And with men, I find that, because my dad always says metal meets the meat kind of guy, but men are a bit more pragmatic in that they're good at operating within the world and with things, and they recognize, because they also make real life things, to better the lives of their women and all that jazz and the rest of society. So the connection that you made between men, that I think academics lack, and then I don't want to say all women, but even the movement of toxic masculinity has that developed because they forgot that men are the makers of the real world, which you talk about in one of your essays, actually I think in a couple of your essays in the book. So that was a really good correlation that you point out there.
Well, I think it was Tom McDonald's in his song where, again, it was another Chad sort of epistemology or bro epistemology, where he was saying that they're complaining about like these women about these toxic masculine figures while they're sipping on their Starbucks. And then the men instantly go like, what it took to get that physical thing in your hand is all men. Right? While you're spouting off something out of your brain, right? And not realizing that everything that's surrounding you is built by probably someone that you claim to not like.
I think that we live in a world where physicality and spirituality is very disconnected. And I think I've written about this in an essay. I don't know if it's in one of the books or just in my blog, but it's called the Gnostic heresy. That's what it would have been called in the medieval times. But it's the idea that the spirit is all that matters.
Right.
And that's just not true. Like, I mean, if you are a Christian, you would understand just how important matter is, because that was, the function of Jesus's sacrifice for mankind was a material sacrifice.
Right.
He had to be a physical man for it. And also that's what separates Christianity from all other religions for me, which is that it was a specific material time and place in history. And it's a archaeologically backed up claim of truth. It's not just there's a whole historiography of Christianity, which I guess is a different discussion. But I think that we live in a world with so much technology that can instantly take us away from our material reality at any moment. And that has led to a lot of bad ideas, because an idea never looks so good as when it's not material, when it's just in your head or just existing in a model online.
Right.
And, from studying, so I have 8 years of hard science education, for better or for worse. And one of the things that always comes up with this AI conversation is, oh, well, we can teach students about science through AI modeling of the real world, and they never have to go out and do a real experiment again. And that is so dangerous from a scientist perspective, because the whole fun of, well, the whole magic of science is that when you do an experiment in the real world, you get to see all of the infinite variables that impact what you're seeing. And though existing scientific theorems may explain some part of what you're observing, they don't explain all of it. And the unexplained parts of the real life experiment that you're conducting, or the observation, the unexplained part is where you have those extra questions that are always included at the end of any good scientific paper. That while we can explain this phenomenon, and it helps to explain why, leaves turn red in the fall, we can't explain this, this, and this, which we also observed. And that is the raw material from which more scientific discovery and curiosity comes from.
Yeah, you
So I think that where I was going with this is that we are a generation that desperately needs to reground in the physical world, and I think that the wisest among us can feel this, and this helps to explain why so many of us are turning to things like learning to knit, or learning to build things ourselves, or writing by hand, or wanting to make things. And to the older generations, this seems kind of puzzling, and they think that we're just idle time wasters. But I think that we understand that there's a wisdom that we gain when we interact with the physical world again.
Yeah, you bring up, so one of my favorite books next to like The Master and His Emissary, just because of all of the stuff that it did for, me and my family, which is the book on the right and left hemisphere. That's like one of my tops. And then my second is this book, Science Unshackled, by Matthew Ehret. And it's because he talks about all of the scientists, like Albert Einstein,
Gottfried, I think, as
God,
well.
Godfrey?
Leibniz,
yeah.
Kepler.
And Kepler. And the thing that they had in common was that they didn't just look at science as you're describing as this. It wasn't the Enlightenment version, which I think is still a manipulated narrative for science. It wasn't that, nor was it the Reformation type version of religion. He looked at these really good scientists that actually made discoveries, and he analyzed how did they do that, and they were very faithful or spiritually minded in their scientific discoveries. They believed in the real world. And scientists like Albert Einstein and is his name Mark?
Max Planck?
Max Planck, yep. Mm-hmm. They would actually play music together. So they'd play violin and piano together in the midst of them thinking about whatever scientific formula or discovery of the universe that they were currently doing. And the funny thing about instruments is that our brains actually, when we pick it up and start playing, they took some scans, and our brains associate the instrument as an extension of our body. It is not an inanimate object. It is another living thing that we are in conjunction with now, which just really touches on what you're saying regarding the mode of attention of science, and how that bodily connection with the spirituality that manifests when you have the right mode of attention going into it. Now, at the very beginning, one of the things that you talked about was you didn't really think, oh, I'm a sage and I'm gonna teach people how to become a bro. You kind of just went into it trying to discover truth, is what you alluded to. So, and the thing with science, when you pursue it in that honest openness of not knowing what's going to come upon your way, that's the easiest way to come upon truth, because truth will come to you because you've left an open mind to it. And so in one of your, I think it's your second essay of Girl Everlasting, you have What Should a Young Woman Do? And it's really funny because it's a misleading title, because you don't just talk about women. You talk about men and women. And this really connects to the bro epistemology, because you pursued the truth of the human condition. In it, you were talking about, I guess you can actually say it, but one of the things that we found really interesting was you connected what men and women need at optimal times of their life to be successful regarding their career, regarding having children. And it was something I didn't see coming, one because of the title, and it was like, what should a young woman do? But it was so on parallel for the men, and I think that plays to the truth that you were just simply seeking regarding the human condition that also gave you the results of bro epistemology.
Well, I mean, my 2 cents before you share your thoughts on that is also like, so when as you're talking and I'm listening to you talk about science and how, you have to consider the different facets, and you're talking about observation and like actually grounding yourself in reality, and more so the material as well, because that literally is what we're in. It, to me, when I'm thinking about this sense of, okay, you're starting to look at bro epistemology and how it plays into what actually became Girl Everlasting as well, as in what should young women do. It makes me think of, in today's our generation, and this, like, especially the kind of wokest movement with the transgenderism and all that fun jazz. I'm like, or not so fun jazz, but it makes me think that what I'm seeing is like almost, okay, so there's two things. Your essay, when you were talking about in defense of the girly girl, right? That one, you mentioned how it was almost like a worshiping of the masculine for females, even though they would probably never want to admit that. What it feels like to me, and a bit of a recent discovery even with that, and it'll play into the, because like my brain went phew, it'll play into the earlier part of the question that Maddie was asking, is for those that are saying, gender and sex, it's not about material, right? It's not about what's down there and the biologicals and blah blah blah. I'm like, then why are you getting surgeries if it's not about that, right? Like, clearly you're showing that there actually is a worshiping of the material, and as like in your defense of the girly girl, clearly you're actually showing there is a worshiping of the masculine. It's like the very thing you're saying is there. And so when we're thinking about this in terms of science and the material itself, and the idea of like gender roles and like men and women and all of that, I think that when we're thinking of how do we consider, and are we considering the, I guess, physical realities of what it means to be a woman, of what it means to be a man. And I think that that's been at least something that has been of most interest to me reading your essays, as well, and especially the one on what should a young woman do, because now you're keeping in context time and the actual physical reality of what it means to be a woman, as in, when you're young, how does it look like? What does it start like? And then how does that play into the person that you may or may not end up getting with, and what it is that their role is? So to play into, I guess, my little 2 bits on why I felt it resonated the most with me. But
Yeah, you guys have brought up a lot of interesting topics, and I mean, points from the essay. And on some level, I feel like I'm being quizzed on something I didn't study for, because I do remember these essays, but I don't remember them in as much detail as when I freshly
Of
published them.
course.
But I do remember writing that essay, and it had been many of my essays. I like, they foment for weeks, sometimes months and years, and sometimes, like, 1 week I'll just randomly get the ability to articulate whatever I was trying to say. And what should a young woman do came out of the constant conflict that I had, because I think that normal living, breathing women don't fit, people in general don't fit into neat ideological boxes as are presented online and on TV. And for example, they like to box me in often as like a trad wife, and then they say like, wait, but you don't know how to sew on a button, and you just learned that today. How could you be a trad wife? You had highlights in your hair once.
Dude.
Trad card denied. And you probably wear jeans. And uh, so that whole conversation was, but like on a more serious note, I did often get asked, well, you went to university and got a master's degree, and you didn't get married until your late 20s. How are you telling young women to get married in their early 20s? And how could you be talking about putting marriage before a career if you spent most of your prime childbearing years studying. And I do understand the hypocrisy in that argument, but the hypocrisy would only be if I was currently doing that and preaching the opposite. But obviously, if I've gone through that phase and have learned, okay, and have reflected and thought, well, what would I want someone to tell me at 18? Okay, that's what I'm going to say, not justifying whatever I have done or not done. And and I think the reason I wrote What Should a Young Woman Do is because I had to come up with these answers on my own, the long and the hard way.
Yeah.
And I would hope that women who come after me would have a much easier time making decisions because the girls that already went through it are charitable and kind enough to give them the answers. And there are many women who don't see life that way, and they want to see the next generation suffer just as much as they did. But I'm not of that category because I have a lot of younger cousins. I have a younger sister. I have a lot of young women that I love, and now daughters, and I don't want them to suffer. The whole conversation actually comes from a vivid memory that I had once with my really good friend when we were in our final year of university, and I went over to her place to have dinner, and we were studying for our midterms or something. And for some reason, you know how like late night conversations can sometimes go off the rails with your friends. And we both wanted to go to medical school at this time. And the conversation went off the rails because we started doing the math for the first time in our lives. Where we said, okay, well, we're 21 now. So if we get into med school right away, then that's 4 years. So that's 25. And then you're too busy in med school because you have to study like 24/7. So potentially you meet someone during your internship when you get matched right after med school. So you do have to do an internship. And she wanted to be a surgeon and I want to be a family doctor, but you still have to do some kind of internship. And so we're like, okay, so you meet someone during internship and you can't have babies during internship. It's too intense. You have to be working really hard. And you have to do a fellowship after. So that takes, and then if you get married right away and you meet someone good, you don't have any problems, then potentially you get married by like 29. And then when do you have kids? And then you have kids. You're going to have a newborn when you just started your brand new job as a doctor.
Right.
That's going to be really hard because you can't be slacking on taking maternity leave on your first year as a new job as a doctor. And that was the first day that I really think that I had a crash out about my life plans. Because in my head, by the time I'm 30, I've got 3 kids, And I mean, I'm 30 now, I have 2 kids. So clearly,
You're behind the ball. You're behind the 8 ball.
I'm really behind. But yeah, so that was the first time that I did the math. And actually, unfortunately, the case is that a lot of girls don't do the math until later.
Yeah.
And they're never even told to do the math. And then doing the math is also told to them as sexist. And then they're also told all of these coping mechanisms that, well, what if you don't even want to have kids or get married? What if that's just a misogynistic lie that's, sold to you to keep you enslaved to the system? And I think that is just a coping mechanism because then you see these same women like treating their pets like children or trying to fill that hole in their lives.
So I'm sorry, it's so true. As soon as you said that, I'm like, oh my God, we do that.
It's not. I was listening to Rachel Wilson.
Yeah, I was just about to bring her up.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with her, and she alluded to a podcast that she'd been on, and it was called the Whatever podcast. So I searched and I briefly looked it up, and it's supposedly all on dating. So I clicked on the video, the live stream where Rachel was there, and I only got through, I think, the first hour because it was so painful to listen to. But then
she had that debate with that girl.
Yeah, that one too, and she did a round.
I didn't get 20 minutes. You're a better woman than I.
It was definitely tough because it was a mixed age range, which was cool. They had a girl that was like 22, and then they all the way up into, you know, the later 40s, and so I thought that was interesting for a good roundtable debate. But the second girl, who's 22, said, I don't want children because I don't want to be held accountable for my actions. I was like, okay, at least you know. And then two,
That's honest.
honest, but she self-admittedly said, like, my dog is my kid and I love my dog. My dog looks at me like it loves me, and I don't want to be accountable for raising a child because what if I screw up? And I'm like, the verbatim what you just said is her argument. So it's not like these women don't know.
No, but it is hypocritical because you're going to have to be accountable to your dog. As in, oh, it looks at me and it loves me. It's like, what if it didn't look at you like it loved you? Then what? You're still being held accountable for the fact that it loves you. Like,
Yeah, it's just really tragic because I think that no matter what philosophical, political, sophisticated arguments people make, the fact of the matter is that everybody needs love and family in their life to have like a healthy existence. And you know, no man is an island is a cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. And I think that if everybody is meant to have a family, then we have to come to terms with some biological realities about where families come from and what families need to be healthy. And that's, you know, and for the other side, I wanted to not just go the full, okay, we'll never have, you know, what about girls who do have a brain and they do have ambitions, and you know, they don't just enjoy growing potatoes and looking after chickens. They want to, you know, they have other interests. There are girls who are amazing musicians and they're classical pianists. There are girls who are amazing mathematicians, you know, even though some people like to deny that they do exist. You know, there are girls who are like every talent in the world. And I think that's where I differ from the manosphere, which is kind of tries to deny the fact that women have a brain at all. And so, you know, I wanted to account for that aspect. Like, how do you balance having both a biological reality if you want a family, which every healthy woman should want, and also the reality that you have talents and a mind and you want to do things with your life? Well, the answer is very simple. You just don't do everything at the same time.
Right.
And it seemed like such a simple answer to me, but it seems to be missed by everybody in this conversation. So I just decided to put it down on paper, and that's what that whole essay is. You just don't have to do everything all at the same time.
And then you do it for men too, because for men, they have, it's not the same intricacy that they have to, in strategy, they got to put into their fertility cycle because they're not as limited as women are. But still, you know, even me and Macy, and we've talked with our friends, you know, we have relatively young parents, not, you know, as young compared to some others, but they had kids when they were like in their early 20s, 19, 20, 21. And reflecting on being a kid with younger parents, I really appreciate having parents that can still bike with me and can, you know, jog and do all those things. And so even because there was a podcast my dad was listening to on Rogue News, and they were trying to solve this very problem, but for men, because young men nowadays are having a hard time finding women, and their advice was, okay, just become beautiful, strong men, work really hard, and if you end up in your late 30s, early 40s, just get a younger woman in her mid 20s was kind of these guys' advice, because they were like, clearly you're not going to be able to find, if you're a young man, you won't be able to find a young girl, because young girls at that age, when you happen to be young, they don't want you, their priorities are messed up. And so I don't necessarily agree with the solution, but the point is they were recognizing the same problem of, you know, young men trying to do a thing as well as trying to find women. And you pointed out a very nice, neither men or women were built for 9-to-5s. And then you talked about how to do this work, kids balance for both men and women, which was quite lovely. Do you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, so to your point about the men being told to just wait until their late 30s or 40s to start a family, um, that is like such a fundamental misunderstanding of romance and love and what it takes to create the kind of bond that creates a successful marriage is not just an economical transactional equation. It's not a math equation. And I think the people who think it is a math equation would do well to read all 6 novels by Jane Austen because the point of her entire oeuvre is that when you try to make it a math equation, it never ends well.
Mm.
And it's there are, countless numbers of married couples who got married when they were in their 20s and poor, and they have like amazing marriages where they found a way to make it all work. And there are couples who, they have the perfect income levels, and the wife is young and the man is a bit older, and they've got, they're making tons of money, and still they have tons of problems because money can solve many problems, but one of the things that it can't do for you is inject virtue into your heart. And and that's one of the hard realizations of marriage, is that it begins with chemistry, and that's undeniable. But to sustain it requires virtue, and that's an essay that I've also written. I've written a lot about love and things, and I think that we are all so focused in the dating conversations about how to get someone that we're not given enough advice about how to keep someone.
Right.
And that's one of the subjects that I've addressed a lot. And I think, not to get too off topic, but like the 9 to 5 subject, I don't remember exactly what I wrote about that. But I think that we're living in a shifting economy, in a shifting world. And the idea of a job as it existed for the last 50 years is not what the future looks like. And I think that the people who are adapting to that are the ones who are going to do really well. You know, I just always go back to this example of this woman who's now like makes 6-figure salary from making custom doll houses for people that she started doing on TikTok. And who would think that as a child that's a viable career option? And there are so many men who when they're creative and competent and they know how to take their talents and skills and apply them in a business setting, like they often have way more flexibility of their time and energy than men who are doing the model of work as it existed from 1940 to 2005.
Yeah, in that essay, the thing that because you're like, I can't remember exactly what I wrote. I'm like, I remember. But the thing that I liked about it was the fact that you said that when it comes to younger women, what it is often portrayed as is, as you said, go to school, even though you don't do the math to actually figure out when you're gonna have a family, right? So it's like go to school, get a career, and then you don't really know how long that's going to go for, and to the point where you might have children, and then that's going to take a large majority of your time because you're trying to raise them. So it's a lot of factors. But you were like, you can start out young, and if you do start out young, there's lots of very positives about that because you're vital and you're able to spend time with them. You have a bit more energy. It's a little bit less exhaustive. And that concept of love applies to even like, I don't have children, but I would assume it applies to rearing children. You can speak more to it because you have them. But that would be like the whole like grow as you go mentality is something that, being a child of younger parents, it was something that felt prominent, which was they were like, well, we don't have all the answers, and so we'll figure it out together, or we'll learn how to do stuff together. And so that was something that was very, I don't know, nice and refreshing. And it made me, as the younger person who's going to be going through the teenage phases later in life, right? And that'll show up. It made me kind of have a bit more respect for them because it was less so of, oh, they're just trying to say what it is that they think, like back in my day stuff, and the days have changed, get with it, grandpa. It's like none of that crossed my brain really, because they were like, well, we want to figure out an update with the times with you, because we're still young enough in here and young enough here to see, can we kind of like grow up together. And it sounds weird, but it's technically still happening, because your brain's not even developed for men or women near like 25, 27. So it's like you are being raised by a child, but it's actually kind of fun. And then, but so you mentioned that when you do that, it might make room for women to pursue what you were talking about, which is the knitting skills later on. If you wanted to get a degree in your 40s because your children are a bit older now and you've taught them to hopefully be able to sustain themselves, doesn't mean you don't obviously stay in contact and connection. But it's like, now if you had any other, I guess, hobbies or things that you wanted to contribute to the world, there still is time for that, because you came out of the gate a little bit earlier with the children dynamic. And then with men, it was kind of like a bit of a flip, where they can start going right after it, because like they're going to need to, for a large part, provide, while the woman's trying to do the raising of them, as in like, here's the philosophies that we can try and learn to adopt, here's like a good etiquette, here's like you and your daughter's going on a walk and just taking a look at flowers, like, but that's so important.
But then you also brought up the idea, you're like, okay, if the man grows his business, grows his career, really invests in his brain, his mind, and then his career, his job, the woman has a potential option to help him with his business, run the books or do the tail work. Is what you were saying, they could do a partnership. I feel like that is kind of, I know in my parents' life anyway, maybe this is a more modern idea, so it's more accepted, but my mom owned and still owns the cleaning company. And when my dad came off the rigs, he thought, okay, well, you built the company and I'm trying to be home with the kids now while they're in their adolescence. I'll just work with you. And my mom was like, blink, blink, you're going to work with me?
She was kind of terrified at first.
She was scared. But I think, men and women in the workplace, or especially if it's in man's business and then the woman helping out with his work, I feel like that has some sort of taboo aura around it.
I would have so much to say about this.
Go.
I think that men and women were created perfectly to work well together on a project. Like, it's just like when you've got the polarity and you've found someone that you're attracted to, that attraction is actually speaking to something deeper that is just aligned, where like the puzzle pieces fit, mentally, like temperamentally, like you just fit well together. That doesn't mean that you think the same way. It means that you fit well together and that you complete each other's weaknesses. And I grew up with parents who ran a business together. And so I saw that firsthand, where there were some things my mom was really good at, and there were some things that my dad was really good at. And my dad was really good at like being a bit harsh in certain times, when you need to fire someone, when you need to trim the fat on a certain thing, when something sounds nice, but it's actually not productive for the business and it's losing money. And he was able to make those hard decisions. And because my mom is such a softie that if everything were left up to her, we would have given everything away for free. And whereas if my dad was doing my mom's job of like, dealing with the customers and being the front face of everything and knowing how to smooth things, we would have no customers, because everyone would be like, who is this cranky person that we're dealing with, So they both like complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I looked at that and said, that's really interesting. And my dad was great with like paperwork and admin, and he was always like, the Excel sheet person. And my mom writes things down on a paper, doesn't know how an Excel sheet works. So that's their complementarity. And so I'm seeing that now with my husband as well, when he he's helping me with certain things. It frustrates me the way that he's doing it. But then, days, weeks, months later, when it turns out that he was actually right to do it that way, and my instincts could have never told me the right way to do things, or like his way, like the way that he does some things, I would never even think of it. And so I make sure to tell him like, oh, you were right about that. Like I think that's important to do, like to give somebody their flowers when they've when you were mistaken. And,
Absolutely.
and the thing is, this complementarity has been perverted by the modern workplace. So the
Mm.
maximum number of adulterous relationships originate in the workplace.
Right.
That's a stat that I don't have right now, but I've heard it on Matt Walsh, I think. And
Okay.
and that makes total sense to me because when you are working intensely on a project together, you are developing a kind of camaraderie and friendship and companionship
True.
that is crucial to nurturing a bond of love. And I think that when men and women are working together in the workplace for the majority of their day, and there's a man and a woman and they're working intensely on a project together, feelings developing is a completely natural consequence of that. And I think when women were added to the workplace, there were benefits to that because they were women have a lot of strengths to contribute to any kind of project, but the weaknesses of that is that it was a way to undermine the family as well. And also it would have been quite unnatural because prior to the Industrial Revolution, you'd have a man's main coworker would have been his wife.
Mm.
The bakers, the baker would have his wife, the bakeress, helping him run their
Right.
bakery.
Right.
Like, so everyone would be engaged in the project of the family business. There are downsides to family businesses, and I know this from friends whose parents ran restaurants, and it was like super chaotic and fraught and insecure in a lot of ways that salaried parents are not insecure. So I'm not saying either model is perfect, but it's just something to explore as an option, especially in today's world where so many transactions and shipping and all this stuff can be handled online remotely. And there's a lot of new technology to get rid of a lot of the weaknesses of the previous models. So it's just an idea that could plant a seed in somebody's mind of like there could be another way to do things.
When you talked about earlier how you were labeled as a trad wife, and one of my favorite
She wears
essays,
jeans. No.
you fraud of a trad wife. You have an essay called "The Artificial Woman" in there, and Macy had brought it up. The transgender movement, and in there, it's really funny because I made this correlation, but a lot of people don't, because when you're trying to remap your world and your identity today, there's so many extremes. Like you said, we're in a lot of the signal to noise ratio is completely unforgiving. So the reality is that people don't make the connection. If you go from the transgender movement or the feminism, you make a hard turn and now you're going to be a trad wife. But you had pointed out that the trad and the trans are two sides of the same coin, essentially. Because the artificial woman, it's not her pronouns, it's not her parts, but nor is she a walking womb. So the trad wife, can get labeled as, okay, you're basically a baby making machine, and now your whole life is your skills are now your identity. So can you sew on a button? Because that, if you can't do that, you're not a real good wife, And it's like, so the same mentalities can be put on both sides, which is why Macy and I, we don't really love the whole party politics and, basically two wings of the same bird, because of the thing you're pointing out, that you can get the exact same mentalities, they just apply it to different things on either side of the aisle.
Yeah, like when I read that, the key distinction was the fact that you were saying neither one of those movements know what an actual woman is.
Yes.
Like they get so caught up in putting it in a nice little box to put on the shelf, and then it just rots there. But they're not keeping in context the time and the nuances of just being a person, first of all, and then on top of that, trying to negotiate, okay, I'm a female person or I'm a male person, so how do I figure out how I want to best demonstrate myself to my fellow human beings?
Yeah, you said it was the difference between an archetype and a caricature, which I love that differentiation.
Yeah, I think that The Artificial Woman was one of my most cathartic essays to write because it was one of the ones that had lived in me for so long and just yelling to come out because um, I just hate people being reduced to things. That's probably like the thing that irritates me the most. And it's because when people are reduced to things, that's the first step to permitting abuse toward them. And buy and sell them and to misuse them. And I think that's where my faith comes in, central to these ideas, which is, when you believe that every human being has a soul that is worth saving, and you don't allow yourself to think of people as transactional material anymore. And it helps to overcome a lot of bad ideas, including actual racism or sexism or, any of these things. And, people think that, oh, well, she hates women because she has these anti-feminist ideas. It's like, no, I actually love them, and I want the best for them.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I want the best for myself too, being a woman. So, it's not like, oh, one rule for me and different for thee. Um, and with the artificial woman, I talked about the fact that you don't love a woman because of that same conversation. What do you bring to the table? That is a transactional conversation, and you shouldn't ask that either of a woman or a man. Actually, a lot of girls do the same thing to men. They reduce them to, oh, is he 6 feet tall, or how much money does he make, or all
Yeah,
of this
what
stuff.
is it? Looking for a man in finance, 6'5", blue eyes, like trust fund, blue eyes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very nice to have, a tall, handsome husband with blue eyes who makes good money. Like that's, who am I to complain? I've got that. Um, but it's, on the, like, what I'm trying to say is that those are not the things that will really create uh, lasting love in your life. Like when you look at what you should aim for is real love. And when I was single, I was at this grocery store waiting for my Uber to pick me up because it was a really hot day, and I wasn't going to take the buses through the suburbs. Um, and I saw this old man and this old woman, and they were so old that they were actually hunched over by age. When they get that hunchback thing going, and they've got that little shuffle of a walk because their knees don't work the same, and their skin has started to, like, it's got spots on it, and snowy white hair. I'm painting a picture for you. And um, the man said to the woman, "Wait here. I'll go get the car and bring it to the front because it's so hot." And they only had like one bag of groceries, and the woman said, "No, I'll walk with you because I want to hold your hand." And so they walked together in their little shuffling walk, holding hands to the car because she didn't want him to walk alone. And um, that's just what love is. You crave each other's presence. You miss each other when you're not there. It's the Catholic wedding vows really do mean something, in sickness and in health, in for richer, for poor, etc., etc. And that's not just like a meaningless contract. It's not just a material contract, rather. It's actually that the conditions that exist when you are in love, you don't care if they're rich or poor. You don't care if they're sick or healthy. You'll still be by their side because there's something unique about them, some spark in them, like that you love beyond anything else. And that's what we should all strive for. And of course, packages do matter. You can't be, if you're like 300 pounds and you're wondering, why can't I find a man to marry me? Like, you should consider losing at least 150 of those pounds. Um, if you're a broke guy and you're like, why isn't a girl willing to marry me even though I, have no job and I play video games all day? Like, yeah, you should get a job. You should get fit. But what these dating discourses miss is that there's an underlying virtue to all of these qualities that you may endeavor to build in order to attract somebody valuable. And these qualities are, for example, the girl who needs to lose weight, you're cultivating a stewardship of your own body. Like, are you looking after your body well and respecting it? And part of respecting your body is making it healthy and keeping it well groomed and beautiful as healthily as you can. Um, Stewardship of your body doesn't mean go get a rhinoplasty and bigger breasts with the surgery. Stewardship of your body means like, don't eat junk food all day and make sure you get some healthy levels of exercise throughout the week. And for a man, like the virtue underlying, like, don't play video games all day and actually go get a productive job that makes money, is not because, he needs to pay for his girl's handbags or whatever, or she needs a big diamond ring or something. Rather, it's because of the underlying virtue, which is that a man who respects his God-given abilities and talents, his health, his youth and vitality, to go and do something useful, productive, and good for the world, and rather than waste his day on gluttonous entertainment. So that is the underlying virtue. So if the girl is actually working hard to look after her body, even if she doesn't end up looking like Catherine Zeta-Jones or Penelope Cruz at the end of it, she still will wear her virtue on her skin. Like, she will look healthy.
That's a great way of saying that. Wow.
Same for the man. Even if he doesn't end up as Elon Musk, or even like, making a six-figure salary, even if he makes less money, if he's really applying himself and trying to be as good as possible at what he does, and has a real skill that he's offering to the world, and trying always to like better himself and use his talents and abilities to the best of his ability, he will also wear his virtues on his face, and he will walk into the world with confidence that is earned. And that is what attracts the opposite sex in a healthy way, in a way that actually leads to love.
You have a couple essays in the book on that, how to judge a man for marriage,
That's the one I was thinking of.
how to get a good man, how to be a good wife. You have all of those, and you basically say you have to emanate that of which you want to, attract. And
I think you said if you want the perfect guy, you got to figure out what it's like to be the perfect girl for that guy then.
Yeah, precisely. And it plays into, because your last essay, Girl Everlasting, you had quoted kind of what virtue was, and you said, like, virtue is altruistic. You have to decenter yourself from your own life to practice virtue. And it's funny because even describing the man's thing, it's like the mode of attention of, it's just to buy your girl's handbag. It's like, men should really value their work more, because you're building the world. Literally, you are maintaining the world. That is no small task. Just as women have to build the next generation, you're building a life. So those are things that are very honorable. And I think those mode of attentions would encourage more people, rather than thinking of it in such a small light as we're being taught to, especially in the West. Now, we are at 56 minutes, but I know that Macy wanted to talk about the toxic normalization of heartbreak, because that's one that both me and her went, whoa. Because you've brought up this idea about love and true love, and me and Macy kind of grew up thinking, and it sounds cold is what I've been told. Like, every time I've said it to people, they shake their head at me, especially women. They think I'm being heartless when I say love is easy. But what I mean is that the act of loving somebody, it comes so naturally to us. It is natural for us to love one another. And so when you wrote the toxic normalization of heartbreak, and even the I think the following essay called Marianne, which is Sense and Sensibility on Jane Austen, both were on the lessons to learn about how really easy it is to love. And that's why it shouldn't be taken for granted, because it needs to have temperance and the boundaries, because passions are, and that love is within our normal purview. And to take it for granted, which some people do. I've even heard people give me, Macy, and my brother advice. You're young, just go have fun. I don't think I need to say anymore. I think you can run with that.
Yeah, so the toxic normalization of heartbreak came when I realized that, I was going through a heartbreak, and I realized my mom had never gone through that. And it kind of sobered me, because my mom married the first man she was ever introduced to.
Fair.
Yeah, my parents had an arranged marriage, and my parents very much have the kind of marriage where they hold hands to the parking lot, that kind of thing. And so my mom had never experienced. She didn't have like a perfectly easy life. Like, if my mom's listening, like, I'm not trying to say you had an easy life. But yeah, that is something unique to our time period. And I always love to take modern experiences that I'm going through, or anyone that I know, and we think it's completely normal. And I try to think, well, what would someone in 1200 think of this if they time traveled? Like, would they think this is normal, or would they think this is abnormal? Like, how would they think about it? And that has helped me to think about discern between so many good and bad ideas in an interesting and creative way. And heartbreak was one of them. So I think that for most of human history, the whole point of it was that for most of human history, the only time that it would have been extremely rare for you to experience that kind of heartbreak, because there would have been so many social protections around even being able to attach yourself that much to somebody of the opposite sex, without the protections of marriage to look after your heart. People think that marriage is just for your assets and taxes and stuff, but actually it's for far more than that. It's to protect you, not just sexually, but also emotionally. And yeah, so that's when I wrote about that. And also I also wrote a lot of tips about how to get through heartbreak in a healthy way, because there are a lot of cliches about how to do it in an unhealthy way. And if you want to get through the other side and still retain your capacity to love and be soft toward love, and have hope for the future and not be jaded, there's a right and a wrong way to go through heartbreak. So that's what I wrote about. And I think that if you go through it the right way, not only are you then open to love, but you also respect the attachment in a very different way, because you understand how difficult it is if you don't respect it, to come back from that.
No, I like that. That was one of the biggest things throughout all the themes actually carry that, which is some degree of responsibility for the I guess the heartbreak, for example, for being a woman, for being a wife or potential wife, right? For being a student of the world around you, and also for being a mirror of the world around you. And I felt like that was something that I think resonated the most with me, was the fact that it's something that is beyond yourself, a little bit more of it isn't as self-centered, because in your Girl Everlasting essay, you talked about how it's so self-centered. It's well, everything's about me and my career and my dreams, and what about my goals and 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 my body and and so it's just, when I was reading it, it was one of the key lines that kind of stuck out to me, and it was that some people, they think that finding their identity is going on the top of a mountain in some far off distant land. Maybe you're having tea with the monks or whatever, or you found a shaman in the middle of the jungle, or an or I think your line was acid trip in the Amazon rainforest or jungle. And they think that that's gonna be the thing that, I guess, elevates them and to what it is that they need to be doing with their existence. And then you were like, but it's not about finding your identity, it's about building it. And something, I don't know, that clicked, because when I was younger, I actually used to be one of those people where I was like, oh, I need to go on like a trip and like figure it out.
We know so many young people,
there's
young
so
men,
many young
young
people
women,
that
and they
still
think
think
they
that.
got to go on a trip. And
I mean, you do need to go out of your comfort zone into an unfamiliar place in order to kind of become an adult. I do believe that, because I think when you're in your childhood swaddled, warm comfort zone, you never come up against any kind of friction that makes you define what you believe and what you don't believe and what you want to do versus what you're automatically doing because it's your routine. But yeah, your identity is built, and if it's most efficaciously built when you are not focused so much on yourself and your desires, but rather on doing something that you believe is good and important.
And I think that you highlighted that becoming a mom was one of the biggest ones for you, if not the biggest one for you. If you wanted to
Yeah,
touch on that.
like I think that I really want to reiterate to anyone listening that I'm not I don't think of myself as above the average woman. I think of myself as the average woman. I might have extra average articulation abilities, but my experiences are
I
very
think she's
normal.
above the average woman. I will gladly make that claim.
Like, for example, I was raised, I didn't know how to cook. Well, I don't know how to sew. I didn't know how to sew. I didn't know how to, not very domestic in any of those regards. Like if I was stopped by the whatever podcast at 25 and they asked me, what do you bring to the table? I wouldn't have a lot to say. Just be like, no, I'm cute. That's, um, and but my husband, when he met me, he loved me for my personality, and he liked me because of my values. And I realized that, wait, there might be something more to this than we were being led on. And I learned so much because of being married to him. There's it's been I've written a lot about this, actually. The Trad Wife Boot Camp is an essay I wrote recently. I don't know if you guys read it, but I detailed all of the things that I had to learn in a very short time period since being married. And I learned them because I wanted to run a decent household and raise good children in a healthy environment and have a good marriage. And all of those things require an immense amount of work and skill, but they're all things that really you should be learning since the age of, like, 11. You shouldn't be learning them at 27. Um,
yes.
but I unfortunately was too busy learning trigonometry. Not to say that you should also learn trigonometry, but you should also, I had working parents, and it was just not we were just living according to the cultural norms of the time, which is that, your kids come home, they do their homework, and then they watch SpongeBob, and then they like hang out, and then they go to sleep. Like that's
That
what
was
you do.
me. That was literally me. Only I was a kid.
Yeah, like you come home from school, like maybe you play in the park for a bit, you do your homework, you watch SpongeBob, and then you go to sleep. And then I'm seeing like what other kinds of childhoods can look like, where you're learning so many skills that are compounding with time over the years. And then by the time you're 18, you can, cook a meal for 10 people and make clothes, and you know how to run a household. Like that was so foreign to me. And what I learned at 27, I would encourage a lot of girls to learn far sooner. And I think it would be a healthy culture that would teach these skills to girls far sooner. But I would want to draw the line that while these skills are important, they're not a prerequisite for love. You see what I mean? That was a distinction that I wanted to make. And and with Girl Everlasting, I went through like a huge ego shift after having my first child. And it was I called it an ego death, actually, because even though I would say, like, before I had a child, I don't think that I was on the worst end of the female selfishness epidemic. I
Mm.
think I was pretty good, um, compared to the rest of my generation. I was, not on the bad side, but I think that I underestimated how deep the selfishness is so rooted in our culture, that, and I didn't even see it in myself,
Mm.
that when I had my first child, I was like, wow, I just wake up in the morning and think of someone else now for the rest of my life. Like,
Aw.
all of my time is bound by another being. Like, and that was the first time, the first month, it was such a harrowing experience for me to reshift my center of focus. And I realized that some girls have go through that way before. Like, they've already handled that because they had younger siblings, they had a family, they had parents, and they were raised in a different way. Um, and I think that I went through that when I had a child, but it's possible to go through that at a younger age and then not be so shocked when you have a child. And I think that that could be, it's a working theory. It could be the reason why the postpartum depression rates are so high in my generation,
Mm.
because I think that they don't know how to deal with this ego death in a healthy way, and so they feel, they don't know how to handle the feelings. Um, and I would say to anyone who might be going through this, or might go through this in the future, is to just lean into it and accept it rather than fight it. And the more you accept it, the more things will suddenly start to become clear, what matters and what doesn't, what is worth spending your time on, what is not worth spending your time on, which of your ideas are frivolous and which ones are significant. And I like I've been more productive since I've had children than I ever was before I had children. And in fact, I can't even properly remember how I spent my time before I had, because I must have wasted like huge swaths of time staring at a wall or something, or probably my phone. Um, because what I can accomplish now, if you tell me I have 2 hours to do something with full concentration and no one's going to bother me, I will get done so much stuff in those 2 hours now. Whereas before, I would have dawdled for ages just because I had the luxury of it. So I think that having a child, so Girl Everlasting, I wrote while I was waiting for a train, at a train station in England, right after my last catechesis class, before I was to become baptized. And so it was just a whole bunch of reflections came out all at once, because the whole purpose of the Christian faith is to find life everlasting in Jesus Christ. So when I wrote that essay, I was reflecting a lot about what it means to live forever, and what does that even look like. And I think that when you decenter yourself from your life, that's the only way that you can find it. And so I found it really ironic, thinking about all the beauty maxers and the health maxers who exist in our time period, that they're missing the most crucial ingredient of them all on how to live forever, which is, true love, essentially.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, that was really good. Maddie, so I just want to, so how much time do you think you have left? Because we are at an hour and 11 minutes, and I don't want to take up too much of your time if you feel like you need to go or anything like that.
My babies are asleep, so I'm happy to answer any of your questions, because you guys have been so gracious in promoting my book, and and it just really makes me happy that something I wrote resonated with you guys.
Well, my one crucial question that kind of comes into my head when I'm listening to this is, so I've heard a lot that women make men conscious, right? And arguably, it also sounds like, from what I'm hearing you say, is that, well, men and children can make women conscious just as much as women can make men conscious, because now there's something put forward where oh, like I have to realize that do they love me just because, I know how to make sourdough, right? Versus do they love me because of my personality and not necessarily just because I know how to make sourdough, right? And there are some women that need to ask themselves these questions. But also, like where does my value lie when I am caring for and thinking of another person every day as opposed to just myself dawdling because I have the time for it, right? And then, so there is a degree of like, there's consciousness. You're saying like clearly there was an ego death and something happened. And so I'm just wondering when it comes to the statement of like women make men conscious, when I'm thinking of that, I'm trying to understand it from a standpoint of, I guess, helping. How can we as women help try and bring forward, as Maddie was talking about the Rogue News interview, of the men that are concerned about men and young men today? Because if we do, yeah.
I thought about that earlier and I forgot you're bringing it all the way back to one of my first questions, because the accusation there that we hear, and I hear it lots, is that women, especially young women, they're attracted to older men because older men are experienced, they have the money, they already have everything. Yes. I can see you're like, oh goodness. But so is that the case? Why would that be the case? Macy's that also kind of like...
It plays because I think that why it would be the case is, as Megha was pointing out too, is a lot of it might
Well,
be...
I'm not asking you, I'm asking her.
Oh, well, okay. Well, I mean, you asked if it played. You asked literally me.
No, I went to your question, like what you were building this women making men conscious. And part of that is like, I think young women looking at men is like, oh, I don't have to make them conscious. I don't have to get on them to get off the games. I don't have to, they feel like they're mothering young boys. And that's why they're attracted to older men, because they don't have to mother them. And that's one thing, Megha, you alluded to was, on one of your blogs, or maybe it was just a post, that a healthy relationship, both the man and the woman should equally feel as if they're mothering and being the child and getting mothered, and vice versa, being parented and not being parented. That's a healthy balance. But to Macy, your question regarding the making men conscious, is that the dynamic? Does that make sense? Why is that the case?
Yeah, no, I'd say that was part of the question. The other part of it was also just more as a solution oriented, because to close it off, just as also for a message for, I guess, because I'm looking at it from the standpoint of like, I can only do what I can do and try and be responsible for as much as I can being a woman. So like for other women that aren't taking into that consideration, even if it's worth taking into consideration, that's actually part of the question for Megha, is it worth taking into consideration for young women their, I guess, ability to make men conscious? Because I feel like that's what one of the biggest things in society has been. Lots of arguments have been around that, because women have gotten so off the rails when it comes to their girl boss CEO and everything that we know the feminism kind of pushed women into, they are in some facets getting blamed a lot for the reactionary response that came from men now becoming a bit more feminized because women were getting a bit more masculinated. And so I'm wondering, to what degree of responsibility can we take as young women to have that responsibility for how men respond to us? And then also how, like, is it laziness to consider, I want an older guy because I don't want to have to deal with him? It's like, is that laziness? Is it sensical? Like, what can we do is basically what I'm asking.
Well, I think that trying to fix the whole world is both daunting and it is tinged with hubris, because none of us can really fix all of society with our little one life. Like, maybe we can, maybe we're the chosen one. But I don't think it's wise to start with that premise. I think that
well, it's more so a leading by example is how I was viewing it.
I think that little interactions can reveal a lot more about your power in the world, in the real physical world. Like, see, that's where we're coming back to, is the physical world is where we have the most impact. And I think that we need to start remembering this aggressively. And not just in making things and regrounding ourselves in material like realities, but also in material realities of relationships IRL. So, as a woman existing in the world, how do you respond to the men around you, both the boys and the young men and the older men, both the men you might be attracted to romantically, or the men who just exist in your world? How are you responding to them and existing with them? And I think that because we are such a social media orientated society, we think we put an overemphasis on the value of logical arguments and debate. But I think the essence of being a woman who awakens the good qualities in a man is that she doesn't do it through debate and argumentation, but rather through essence and being. And I'll give you like a very simple example of this is, when I go out in the world, and I'm, getting off the train in London, Ontario or something. And, I took the train so many times because I went to university there. And there was like, never have I ever lifted my own luggage off that train. And I don't know, maybe you could say it's just Canadian men are really kind. You could say that.
Mm.
Or you could just say that, like I didn't have a resting mean face on. And I have a smile on my, and I'm a friendly person, and someone saw me trying to, and I'm not an entitled person either. Someone saw this, little lady trying to lift this massive suitcase, and even though I can lift it, I always pack it so that I can lift it if I need to. Um, there always some guy is like, "Do you need help with that?" And just lifts it off for me and even carries it to the door for me sometimes. And I don't ask him to do that. I just say thank you. And I'm very gracious because that is something very kind to do for someone who's weaker. And I don't say, like, I can lift my own bag. How dare you? Or like, how dare you deign to speak to me? And there's a lot of these memes. You have to be really aware of Instagram frying your brain as well. Like, there's a lot of content these days about being a Slavic girl or like winter Latinas, and they're so proud of how bitchy and mean they are to men, and how like they'll like look at you with these horrible eyes and like be judging you, and if you better behave like this or else you're not getting near me. And I have found in my real life experience that you get a lot more out of being sweet, being
You
kind
can
and friendly.
attract more flies with honey than shit. Sorry to say it. Not the most pretty way of saying it, but
Rigor wisdom.
wisdom. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that TLDR, just said it in a shorter way. So, yeah, so I think that if we're trying to awaken the consciousness of men, I think the most effective way that women can do this is not necessarily by any essay that we can write online or any like, political movement that we can lead, but rather through each individual interaction with real men in our lives, showing them sweetness, kindness, grace, and um, just like like a innocence and a goodness that inspires them to protect and to want to be better than they are. And I often find like even the worst kinds of men are like the most curmudgeonly men are disarmed by this, and they soften to it. And the best example, literary example I can give is Grumpy from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. You know how Grumpy like women and their wicked wiles, and we don't know who she is, and she's gonna lure the wicked witch to us and cause problems, and I won't wash my hands because she's not the boss of me. And then eventually Grumpy softens because Snow White is just so unbelievably sweet, and she kisses him on the head. She makes him an apple pie, and eventually he becomes Snow White's he loves Snow White and he cries at her funeral before she's awakened. Uh, Spoiler alert. And so that's my response to that. And also, like, remember this in Snow White, I mean, in Sleeping Beauty, it's the prince who has to awaken Sleeping Beauty. But that's more related to sexuality and young, and like, a man awakens a female sexuality. But I think that um, how can women lead the charge in in helping men to become more masculine again? And I think it's um, just stop worrying about them and thinking about them so much, and the lost causes will stay lost causes, and you don't need to worry your head about them. And you just be your sweet, friendly, um, innocent, and loving self, and then the men around you who step up and become better for it will let you know, and they will most certainly let you know.
Well said. Well said. It reminds my favorite prayer: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And so it goes back to that point which you were saying, which is resonate the things and emulate the things that you would like to attract. And then you can't worry about the rest because there's a lot more world than there is you. And it was funny because while you were describing this interaction between you and the gentleman's on the train, you said emanate an innocence, but you didn't just say innocence, you said an innocence and a goodness. And one of the essays in your book is on childishness, vice or virtue. And you said it should neither be vilified nor completely revered. And you said innocence should not necessarily in itself be protected, but femininity, or goodness as you alluded to, with innocence should be protected, because there's the differentiation in the actions. And that's another thing that women can also, a good differentiation, which is why people should read the book, because sometimes younger women and then even older, we know some older women that get lost in that. They overemphasize how, because even you in our first episode with you, you said, I think it's partly like the childish mind or childishness that I have in my brain still looking at life anew, revitalizing it. But it's not just arbitrary, and it is not, wishing you were again the innocence and the blissfulness and the ignorance that a child naturally has because they don't have the experience of the world. You're not looking for that. You were still building upon it with experience and context. So if there's anything else that Megha you would like to say, or do you have any more questions, Macy, for her?
I'll stop.
Yeah, the last thing I would say is if there's one skill that I think every girl should cultivate in herself, it would be the ability to cheer yourself up. And I would just say that I would want every girl to know that it's always within your power to cheer yourself up, no matter what. And you just have to decide to do it.
I have
that's strong.
Okay, I won't go to, but I have a thought. I won't ask a question, but it's just an adage to that, is because I like playing with I don't know, something that just concerns me the most is when you are seeing how younger girls interact with social media and then what gets promulgated in their head. And so my last little adage of why I loved what you just said so much about learning how to cheer yourself up is so many times, so often, you'll see that it's like if you learn how to properly manipulate them, like you said, if you know how to be like the mean one that's like, oh, well, just the right amount of spice and everything's going to be nice, like Powerpuff Girls or whatever. It's like if you know, it gets promulgated like that. And if you know how to use your sexuality to like manipulate him and all of that, and don't get me wrong, that's a relationship that actually you need to consider as a woman, of like how much actually, if anything, sometimes it's as simple as you shouldn't have to apologize for being a woman. So if you get men that are attracted to you and it's hard to say no and they're just not giving up, it's like, don't apologize for the fact that that's something that instinctually they are drawn to, and you have to figure out how to navigate your reaction to it, but not necessarily try and squander yourself. But when it comes to the sort of narratives that they're getting fed from these mentalities of how to manipulate men, you do have to ask yourself, what are you trying to get out of them? And so, part of me does feel like when you say you should learn how to, cheer yourself up, I do sometimes feel like maybe that's the problem, is we're delegating too much to a man of some, and not even just a man, but just another human being, to be the person that tries to pull us out of the, I guess, hormonal fit, whatever it is that we're dealing with. And I think that is trying to learn, how can you be a bit of your own best friend in that regard. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to like yourself. It just means, can you try and figure out how to more, I guess, get more better. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be perfect, but can you go towards a more perfect union, as in just keep moving towards it? Then that's all it is. It's a marathon, not a race. And so that would be like my little adage.
I think it's really important that you highlighted the manipulation tactics that are so popular these days. And it was really clever what you said, like, what are you trying to get out of this? Like, if you have to manipulate somebody into treating you well, like, is that really a relationship worth having? Is that really the right person for you? If you need to do all these Jedi mind tricks to get them to treat you okay, and they're really, the catch is really attractive. Like, they say, if you want to get him to adore and cherish you, you need to listen up for the next 3 minutes. I'm going to tell you the top 3 things you need to be doing if you want to be cherished, if you want to be on his mind all the time, if you want to like, I've already got you listening. Like, you want to know what I have to say about that. Like, if I wrote
I really don't want you to tell me.
Generally, like, if I wrote an essay about that, it would get it would instantly go viral and make tons of money, because that is you have to realize these people are here to make money off of your attention. And this is a really cheap way to make attention money, I guess, is convincing girls that if they just learn these few tricks, then they can get any man obsessed with them. And that is exactly what, like, a wicked witch would tell you when she's luring you into the forest to sign your voice away on a contract, and the truth is that there is no magic spell you can cast on a man to make him love you or treat you well or adore or cherish you. And you just have to do things the long way and the hard way. And often it's when you're not trying that your innocence comes through, and that's what's most attractive of all. It's like when it's not calculated and it's not manipulated. Because if you want, either he's so dumb that he fell for your tricks and you're with someone that you're smarter than, and then you can't rely on them, or he's so much smarter than you that he sees right through your artfulness and he is repulsed by it. So both is like a lose-lose scenario.
Now you have made so many Disney references, and I have to ask, because we know that Disney is full of pedophiles. How did you reconcile this in your brain?
I would say that the original stories that I like in Disney were made at a very different time, when Disney was a very different thing. And actually, I'm working on an essay that is going to be released this week, comparing Studio Ghibli to Walt Disney and the whole sordid history of Disney. So Walt Disney died in 1955, and then his brother took over, Roy Disney. And then it was tanking in the 70s, and then it got taken over by a whole bunch of conglomerates. And that's when it really lost its soul. And you can see it in the types of films that came out. So like Little Mermaid in 1989 was the Hans Christian Andersen tale stripped of all religion. Even though it was a commercial success, it had issues, obviously. And then same for Mulan and all of the rest that came after, they were extremely successful because they still retained the animating talent. And then in the 2000s, they got rid of the animating talents as well. And then so they were left with nothing. So with Disney, it's a complicated equation. And I think that they did create some beautiful works of art. And I don't think that we need to necessarily get rid of all of those just because some of the other things they made were horrible.
Precisely. That's the 4-to-1 rule. 4 parts truth to 1 part lied. Take what's good out of things, and it's just like even bad authors can write good lines on occasion. You know, it's you got to find the nuance in everything.
What was it? I think it was someone that said that Ian McGilchrist, he is studying the antithesis of like I guess God and religion. It was related to that, and then they said they were trying to key him into how he was basically like studying Satanism and all that fun jazz, and just basically someone who's really getting nitpicky to try and figure out some of the nefarious characters that might be affiliated with people that may or may not hold special weight in other philosophers' hearts. And I was like, well, when you're studying, like, I guess, any sort of topic that has to do with goodness. So for you, when you're looking at Disney and you're trying to find, well, what is the beauty? What is the goodness that can be found here? It's like, well, you're also then technically studying the opposite because you're looking for this. So it means you have to negate and figure out, well, what's not that? And so immediately when you're like, oh, what's not that? You're in the roots of some of the nefarious things that some people don't like to get into. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a very wise way of putting it.
Megha, Lillywhite just caused you wise. How do you feel? How do you
Not
feel?
worthy.
Not worthy.
Not worthy.
Right? Same.
I'm like, I feel like a liar.
Okay, we have been talking, everybody, about her book, Girl Everlasting. So you can buy it on Amazon.
Yes.
We have our copy. Go get yours. And then, because there's so many essays that we didn't touch upon, even Bro Epistemology, I haven't read it yet.
I started, and we definitely need to have you on for Bro Epistemology.
Yeah, we'll have you on again because you know you have an Alberta fan club if you didn't know already. So we will cultivate this. And so other than getting those 2 books, which everybody should do for your kids, for yourself, all of that jazz, you can follow her blog permanently and continue following her brain and her insights to the world and men and women relationships.
At Classical Ideals.
Yes, she's on Substack. Megha Lillywhite is her name, and Classical Ideals is the Substack. Definitely go support this mind because we do, and clearly we're intelligent, so do what intelligent people do.
Wow.
Thank you so sincerely.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
It was a pleasure.
Without further ado, everybody, this has been At Home with Holmes.